Get in, loser. We're going theatre reviewing. Oh my god, hey, my name is Mickey Joe. I'm a professional theatre critic here on social media, and though it is not yet October 3rd, it's June. I am here today to let you know what I thought of the long-anticipated West End arrival of Mean Girls the Musical, which opened last night at the Savoy Theatre. This, of course, is the musical adaptation of the iconic early 2000s film, which appeared on Broadway. The film was recently remade as the musical adaptation on screen, and after 6 years of waiting for the show in the West End, finally we have it. And it's arriving with an enormous amount of pre-built popularity, both because of love for the Broadway version of the show, as well as, of course, a lot of love for the original film and for the concept of Mean Girls. The thing has existed for long enough now that its fans are multi-generational. And yet there is still plenty for us to talk about in this review, because you may be wondering, what are the West End cast like? Is everyone well suited to their roles? Who is giving standout performances? How does this show rank in terms of other movies that have been brought to the stage as musicals? And what version of the show is this? Because it was updated between Broadway and its first national tour. More changes were made for the more recent film adaptation. What exactly is this Mean Girls like? And I'm going to be answering all of those questions for you today. Stay tuned. We're going to be talking about changes for this new London version of the show. We're going to be talking about standout performances, and I'm going to tell you whether I think it's any good or not. But I would also love to hear from you. If you have already seen Mean Girls in the West End, comment with all of your thoughts and feelings down below. Who gave your favourite performance? What was your favourite moment from the show? Finally, if you do enjoy this review, make sure to follow me wherever you are seeing or hearing this. Hello to you all on podcast platforms. It may not be Wednesday, but I am wearing pink. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications down below so you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews, and an exclusive behind-the-scenes vlog where I got to interview multiple cast members and the creative team on the pink carpet, as well as after the show. Lots of Mean Girls content to look forward to across all of my social media channels. You can find me as Mickey Joe Theatre across the internet. But for now, let's talk about whether or not I liked the thing. So, Mean Girls is the stage musical adaptation of a 2004 teen comedy film by Tina Fey, partly based on a book called Queen Bees and Wannabes, as well as by Tina Fey's own high school experiences, and seemingly inspired a little bit by the cult film Heathers, which of course has since also been adapted for the stage and has been very successful in the UK. Mean Girls originally starred Lindsay Lohan as Katie Heron, a student arriving from Kenya, Africa, who had previously been homeschooled and had no concept of the rules of social hierarchy within an American high school. She was introduced to these by the first real friends that she made, Janice and Damien. They took on the responsibility of introducing Katie to the school's social hierarchy, something that she, as a narrator of the film, conceived as being similar to the wildlife that she was used to in Kenya. Now, at the top of that food chain were the Plastics, three popular girls ruled by their leader, Regina George. She's rich, she's blonde, she's perfect, and she was originally played by Rachel McAdams. And she's one of those iconic characters that everyone sort of loves to hate but secretly wishes they had been, I think. Or maybe that's just me, I don't know. Listen, she owned her high school power. Anyway, the drama comes from Katie being immediately recognised by Regina and the Plastics, presumably because Regina can sense that Katie represents something of a threat, even if just because she's pretty. The Plastics then invite Katie to sit and have lunch with them, something that she's been told is relatively unprecedented, which gives her the opportunity to find out what they say about other people. Janice and Damien then come up with the idea for her to, in part because she also wants to date Regina's ex-boyfriend, who Regina deliberately gets back together with in order to spite Katie and sort of exert her power. They make up a plan to ruin Regina's life, basically, and disintegrate her social status. But not unlike in the Russian revolutions of the early 20th century, with Katie's power on the rise, is she going to become a benevolent leader, or is she going to be just as bad, if not worse, than Regina George? This is what we find out in the film, and of course also in the show. Now, the musical arrived on Broadway in March of 2018 and was doing reasonably successfully. It originally starred Erica Hennickson and Taylor Louderman, Barrett Wilbert-Weed and Gray Henson, as well as the wonderful Kerry Butler playing all three of the film's adult female roles, like it's Spring Awakening. In the film, these were originally played by Amy Poehler as Regina's iconic wannabe cool mother, and Anna Gasteyer as Katie's sort of incredulous anthropologist mother who doesn't understand her new behaviour, as well as Miss Norbury, the math teacher, played by Tina Fey herself. Subsequent casting of the show's Broadway run included Renee Rapp, who would go on to play Regina George in the film adaptation of the stage musical, as well as Sabrina Carpenter in a very short-lived stint because the production was shut down amidst all of the COVID stuff, basically. With the end of the world, Mean Girls sadly also came to an untimely end, and probably would have run for a decent amount of time on Broadway had this not interrupted its run that was sadly never resumed. Instead, they went on a US tour, and there had also been plans for the show to come to the UK, which were also delayed by COVID. But finally, it's here at the Savoy Theatre. I think it's going to be here for a pretty long time. It's already sold very well because so many people have just been really excited to see this on stage. But just because it's Mean Girls on stage as a musical doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be great. So let me tell you what this show is actually like. But first, in an unusual twist, I normally talk about performances at the end of these reviews. In this one, I'm so enamored with them, I want to talk about them near the start, because I think they're one of the most important things about this production. So let me tell you about the show's original West End cast. Now, I have little thoughts and feelings here and there that I will tell you about individuals' performances, but by and large, I think this show is sublimely well cast in the UK. And as part of the British theatre industry, I have a tremendous pride, actually, in all of these, many of them, like really exciting rising stars taking on these roles. And, you know, it's very exciting whenever a Broadway musical transfers over. Like, when those auditions get posted on Spotlight, people get very excited about them and people really covet these dream roles. And, you know, they're doing such a fantastic job. It's an entirely British cast for this American transferred musical. And, like I said, I'm very proud of all of them. In particular, of Charlie Byrne as Cady. Now, as we've seen in the recent film adaptation of this is a deceptively difficult role to get right. And she has fewer tools at her disposal to land Cady and land Cady's journey and her transformation over the show, and then her sort of reckoning and coming to terms with what's important, because she doesn't have what Lindsay Lohan had in the original film, which was those voiceover moments that I do think still are very valuable, and it's sad that they're not a feature of the show. What we get instead is voiceover occasionally from Janice and Damien, who are like lovable, popular breakout characters, but it's not strictly about them. And also it presents them in a certain amount of objectivity, which they don't really have, because it divorces them from the fact that everything that Cady did to Regina was also kind of their idea. Anyway, we no longer have the benefit of Cady's inner monologue, hearing all of her anxieties, and so in the musical they have to wear that on their face, and they have to display that in their body language, and they have to be a little bit more transparent. And this is what Charlie does particularly well, because there's a longing from her at the beginning when she is talking about her desperation to go and have more friends her own age and how excited she is to be going to the US. But that's something that we see getting deflated incredibly quickly when confronted with the realities of an American high school that she hadn't anticipated. So we see her sort of retreating into herself a little bit, and then ebbing and flowing, because she gets these little wins very quickly and she gets encouragements, but then she gets knocked back and then she says things that she doesn't realize are going to be embarrassing, and we see her really at odds with herself in these early moments of the show, and she portrays that anxiety very well, but with a smile on the entire time because of like the positive person that she is. The guiding force for Cady throughout this entire thing is Aaron Samuels and the affection that she has for him, and this is also played very well. You can see immediately the chemistry between the two of them, but you can see incredibly clearly how much of a crush she immediately has on the cute boy sat in front of her during calculus. Then she really lands the whole transformation that she gets in the second act, when she has become the new leader of the Plastics in Regina's absence, and you know, she's still trying to balance being friends with Janice and Damien but also having newfound social obligations, and she's twirling her hair and she's dressed very differently, and it's the subtle shifts in character that I really enjoy here, as well as the opportunities to peer through what is still a facade that she's putting on and see the real Cady beneath it, like when Aaron, at a party that she throws at her house just to get him to come, says things that she wasn't expecting him to and sort of challenges her. We see these moments where we can glimpse who she actually is when she's singing More Is Better. That and her performance of Icy Stars are probably my favourite Charlie Byrne-Katie moments. The only thing I feel like she could push a little bit harder is I just want more selfishness from her in the first half of the second act, and she yells at Gretchen and, you know, she behaves unkindly towards her friends, and that's in the material. I just want to feel like a little bit more entitlement and a little bit more like gleeful indulging in the social power that she has. But I think fans are really going to fall in love with this performance. She has this magnetism and this star power to her, and she sings so beautifully. It's such a perfect voice for Katie, this crystal clear belt that she delivers it with, but such a sweet vocal tone. It's different to Regina's kind of like villainous, insidious belt that we'll talk about later, as well as Janice's just like rock star power. It's clear, it's sunny, it's bright, it's lovely. Let's talk about Regina next then, because though Katie is technically our protagonist, we all care about Regina George, and we were all fascinated to know who was going to be getting this role in the West End, and the answer was Georgina Castle. Now, though Georgina has been seen on stage before as Sophie in Mamma Mia, as one of the stepsisters in Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella, and more recently as Jovi in Elf at the Dominion Theatre, this still feels like a very exciting breakout role for her. And she arrives in total command of the thing. She looks just perfect for it, which matters a lot in a show like this. The way that she holds this posture and this steely stare as they push her forwards on this lunchroom table in her dramatic first entrance, the way that she executes this choreography, she's being carried around by the male ensemble and walking across these chairs. She spends the entire first act playing this power and this authority, often with a smile on her face whenever she does this funny like vocal fry thing where she's like, whatever. It's very funny, she gets a lot of laughs, and it's the comedy of her Regina George that I think is deceptively great, because we all remember like the whole like bitchy thing, but Georgina's humour is brilliant, particularly towards the end of the show after she's had something of a humbling experience, which I won't spoil for you if somehow you don't know the plot of Mean Girls. I mean, they bring it up in the first 2 minutes, so why not? But the way that she plays Regina's mellowed personality because she's on painkillers, and it's this almost slightly drunken quality as she's like yelling things across the prom, so funny. It's very, very good. And of course we must talk about her vocals as well. I've heard snippets of this part of Georgina's voice before in previous shows, but I feel like I've never been able to hear the full extent of her range and of her power. And when she's singing these huge songs like Someone Gets Hurt, which is just like pure Bond theme, and World Burn, which is crazy high belting, she does a fantastic job of attacking it with a power and a fury, but again, just confidence. She is projecting confidence and control the entire time, and it is so well sung. Let's talk about the rest of the plastics then. Elèna Gyasi and Grace Mouat play Gretchen and Karen, respectively. Elena, I really enjoy. I think she brings a lot of new qualities to Gretchen. We still see the whole like highly strung anxiety and insecurity played very well, but also, in particular vocally, she brings a very different kind of a power to the reprise of What's Wrong With Me when she spins around on the spot and starts singing this song that we've already heard earlier in the show. And the comedy comes from the fact that, like, even with a different person who she's trying to be the best friend of, the same thing is still happening to her. But the way she belts those first few notes out are very funny, and her entire unraveling and spinning out of control at the end of the first act is great. I also love every time she makes a chaotic bird noise. I think there's room even for her Gretchen to be a little bit more unhinged the entire time so that we can see the breakdown coming. Grace as Karen, meanwhile, I just loved. I thought she was brilliant at it. This may be my favourite Grace Mouat performance I've ever actually seen on stage. And, you know, it's not a performance that changes a lot or undergoes as much of a transformation as almost anyone else in the show, because she's just kind of going about her life, smiling, waving, unbothered by the hardships of knowing much. Karen, if you don't know, is always portrayed as the less knowledgeable of the three, and that definitely rings through with Grace's incredibly charming performance of the role here. The way that she moves at this, like, never once is she rushing in this show, just calmly walking around, just beautifully oblivious in several situations. She gets a moment when her, Gretchen, and Katie are brought into the principal's office to ask them about the origins of the burn book, and he mentions what it says about Regina, and she just hysterically laughs with no instinct for her own self-preservation in that moment. It's such a funny part of the show. But she is just incredibly endearing, even delivering a number like Sexy, talking about her Halloween costumes and why she enjoys Halloween so much. It's charming, it's sweet, it's wonderful. Now, while this is a brilliantly female-heavy show, some of my favourite performances came from some of the show's supporting men. I want to talk quickly about Daniel Bravo, who plays Aaron Samuels, and it's not Hamlet, like there's not an enormity for him to do, but one of the greatest performances in this show, I think, and I think a lot of it comes from having just led Cruel Intentions at the Other Palace as Sebastian Valmont and having to carry a lot of that with his charisma and his personality. This is, by comparison, a much easier track, but he has such a good grasp on Aaron, like it's so perfectly pitched, he does exactly what he needs to do, and at all times on stage is in such control of this characterization, which I think is to the benefit of Georgina's Regina and Charlie's Katie, with whom he largely interacts. But it's really straight out of early 2000s, like, American high school comedy. He has the whole, and I know it wasn't Chad Michael Murray in the original Mean Girls film, it was Jonathan Bennett, but he has the Chad Michael Murray, like, Cinderella story thing of, like, I'm really handsome and popular, but I don't believe in the values of the social high school class that I belong in, but I'm also going to do absolutely nothing to change that. And the moments where we can see him beginning to fall for Katie, very sweetly played, very nice. The part where Regina tells him at his party that Katie has a crush on him, and we can see sort of this smile broadening across his face, like he might want to do something about that. Those are lovely. I don't necessarily, and this is also to do with the material, completely think it's justified for him to get back almost immediately after this with Regina. I just don't think there's enough in the material for it to feel like she's really tricking and convincing and seducing him. Then we have Tom Xander, who plays Damien, who I'm going to tell you is giving the greatest performance on that stage, because this feels like a role he was born to play. Every single thing about it, the comedy, the iconic line readings, most of the iconic lines from Mean Girls, I think, come from Damien. The physical comedy, the vocals, the choreography, the chemistry that he has with Elena Skye as Janice. Tom is just the perfect Damien. He sounds fantastic. He gets the biggest laughs. He is a complete star on that stage, and this feels like a career-defining performance for him. I have very little else to say other than the fact that he embodies this role so fully, and in particular, of all of the characters on that stage, the real die-hard Mean Girls fans who are coming to see this are going to look at him and go, he is Damien. That is, it just is. Then we have Elena Skye alongside him as Janice, and I really enjoy a lot of her performance. It's a take on the character where, you know, she's moved past a lot of her anger for Regina and about the plastics and everything, and she's just kind of done with it and unbothered. I think I would like to see more hurt there when reflecting on the past and with everything that's happening, and sort of cumulatively throughout the show getting more and more bothered by everything that's going on, because it does feel a little bit dispassionate. And I think, you know, that's a take, that's an interpretation of how Janice might react to that stuff. It sort of feels like Elena is playing Janice in her 20s when she's gone to a lot of therapy about it, rather than in the midst of that high school experience where, even though she's separated from everything and she's doing her art and she's with Damien and they're like very irreverent and just making fun of everyone else in the school, I feel like she still cares, and I feel like I want to see a little bit more attitude there rather than her being sort of just more blasé throughout the thing. The voice, however, you can't argue with, even for a moment. She has this real rocky edge to it, which is why she was so fantastic as Scaramouche in We Will Rock You, and it's perfect for the sung Janice material in this show. We also have Luka Chadwick Patel as Kevin G, giving you nothing but huge enthusiasm and energy and attitude. Love that from him. Zoe Rainey is a complete star as the trio of adult women, as Miss Norbury, Mrs. George, and Katie's mum. Once again in this production, like in the most recent film, Katie's mum is a single parent. I do think sort of there's a little bit of a parallel between how broadly and comically Regina's mum is portrayed and Katie's mum is portrayed, and I want Katie's mother to feel a little bit more grounded and a little bit more human, rather than, and this is very much the way it's directed and the way it's written, because she's walking around like burning sage and she is portrayed as a caricature of this very different parent to Regina's, and I think it's that duality they want to show. They even have a moment where Zoe has a quick change from one into the other almost immediately, and a split set that shows the two different households. But she gets very deserving applause, not only for that transformation, but for her first entrance as Mrs. George as well, who is an iconic character from the film, and she very much does her justice. Likewise with Miss Norbury, I think I just want a little bit more honesty and reality there, and this is not something that the show concerns itself with an awful lot. It's bright, it's pink, and it's high energy, and it's musical, and it's not terribly sincere. We'll talk more about that towards the end. But I think what Miss Norbury can represent in the original film and in this story is very valuable, and so I think just maybe a slight softening there would have brought a different edge, but would also be a little at odds with the rest of the production, for reasons I'm going to talk about later on. Finally, I also want to mention Akko Mitchell, who plays Mr. Duvall. He's hilariously funny, and he has done a broad variety of work over his career, but he is no stranger to sort of certainly at least an awkward comedy on stage. He does that very well. He was a Sweaty Eddie in the original West End cast of Sister Act. And Mr. Duvall is, I think, an underrated comedy character, and has so many of these brilliant hysterical outbursts and, you know, moments where he's having to undermine himself. Akko delivers every single Mr. Duvall line brilliantly. I also want to point out it's a killer ensemble who are working very hard on that stage, who are bringing you campy characterization. I cannot wait for those understudies to start going on in principal roles, but in particular, Annie Southall gets so many of the best one-liners and gets this talent show performance moment, and she plays this sort of, she plays a handful of like crazed and very intense students, scene-stealing stuff. So like I said, I really enjoy the performances of this show. I think it's sublimely well cast. I think a lot of these are huge rising stars. And, you know, I think for the vast majority of people, this is really all that they need. It's Mean Girls on stage as a musical with catchy songs, with the iconic moments sung incredibly well, with great dancing, with huge laughs. We laugh for so much of the first act. It's really genuinely funny. And you have to assume that that ticks all the boxes for most of the people in that theatre. But there are other people who are going to hold this to the same theatrical standard that they would hold anything else. And before I talk about what I actually think of this material and this production and these creative choices, I want to explain where I'm coming from in doing so, because I'm not dismissing this because of its tone or because of anything that it's based on, because I think Legally Blonde is a fantastic musical, and this is doing very similar things, with even some people in common in having brought it to the stage. But there is a whole scale of film to stage musical adaptations, and I think there are ways in which Mean Girls could be stronger. It's still really entertaining. I still really enjoy myself. It's super fetch. It could be Fetcher. Let me tell you why. So I'd mentioned already, I feel like we lose a lot from losing Katie's perspective as the narrator. There are so many valuable insights into her character and into her mindset. The line that she had in the middle of the original film when she was saying, I could hear people getting bored of me, but I couldn't stop myself talking about it. We don't get any of those moments or those reflections, and so they either have to be cut completely or she has to say them in a very heavy-handed way. When she is reflecting on her situation during the Mathlete Championships and she's judging the girl opposite her and then realizing that's not going to help her win, she now has to say that instead, and it becomes this slightly awkward back and forth, and it's one of the many ways in which the show just feels like a little bit more of a cartoon version of what it originally was, a little bit less sincere, a little bit less real, a little bit more sort of broad and campy, which a lot of people aren't going to mind. And it's not like we're going to Mean Girls for an enormous amount of realism, but there is a truth to it and an honesty beneath the whole thing, and there always has been. And the through line of Mean Girls for me has always been the entire community of girls at the school, not just Katie and the Plastics and Janice, but all of them. And it's those other girls at the school, like in the most recent film adaptation, that we lose in the stage musical, I'm sad to say. Now, the new version of It Roars, one of the earliest songs in the show, has different lyrics and a whole different melodic section in the middle, and we have excised the moments where Katie is where she experiences mean behaviour from other girls, and they're like pushing past her and someone says unsubscribe and the sorts of things like that. And she will later refer to this in the song Apex Predator, when she is observing that those same girls that weren't nice to her see the girls who weren't nice have to scatter like mice from a jungle cat, are fleeing from Regina, and by being in proximity to Regina and by being friends with the Plastics, she is protected. It's the same thing, it's exactly the same thing that Veronica Sawyer has in Heathers, when she becomes friends with the Heathers, and her justification for doing so is that they will keep her safe throughout the rest of her high school experience. That's a really important angle into the beginning of this whole narrative in terms of the bullying focus and what Katie is trying to avoid. But we don't get those early moments of other girls being mean to her, and we don't get the suggestion that this is not just the Plastics being mean to everyone else, but because of Regina's behaviour and because people look up to her in this twisted way, an entire atmosphere of nastiness has been cultivated throughout the high school at every level. So you have these less popular girls being mean to the girls beneath them, like it's this whole hierarchy that finishes with the Plastics. It's not just them, right? This is what all gets healed later when they do the apologies and the trust falls in the gym, and when Katie snaps up the pieces of the spring fling crown and tosses it out to other people, which I have thoughts about and I will get to in just one moment. But at the beginning, what happens instead is she says something embarrassing in the middle of her calculus class, and everyone then laughs at her instead. And it doesn't feel specifically like it's the other girls being mean to her, nor does it feel like she's noticing bullying. She's just done something that people find unusual because she's not used to being in that environment. Now back to Spring Fling. Katie gets the crown, she snaps a little bit off the top. I do think it would be more impactful if the first snap was to be snapping the whole thing in half, but I get that you need a crown at every performance, and like how they actually do that is probably challenging beyond ways that I can comprehend. However, she throws the first piece to Gretchen when she's like, I see all of you over there, and she's singing kind of generic song lyrics about it, and she throws it to Gretchen. And Gretchen, don't get me wrong, Gretchen is much maligned throughout Mean Girls. Is she the most maligned girl in the school? I don't know. Does she deserve the first piece of the crown? Does it kind of feel like the Plastics have had a fight and they're just making up among each other and everyone else in the school is still going to be rolling their eyes? Absolutely yes. Eventually Katie starts throwing it to other people, but you don't get the heart from that moment in the film when she's like calling out specific individuals and she's like, you look beautiful. That hair must have taken hours. We don't get any of that because the other girls at the school have no identity. Not in this musical version. I do like that Janice gets included in that moment and gets to wear what is left of the crown and goes on stage with Katie. That's a nice moment, but I think there is a bigger story that they neglect to tell here. In terms of the show's material, I also think that the music is incredibly strong, and the book, which has been partly adapted from the original film and then updated with a lot of fun topical references. They talk about Ozempic, they talk about Paddington Bear, that one's in there for the Brits. There's a lot of updated jokes that work really well and that really land. The lyrics have always been a bit of a sticking point for Mean Girls, because I think, you know, with the reality of trying to write something in a believable adolescent voice, a lot of them still come across as being anywhere between questionable and cringe-inducingly bad. And again, for a lot of people this isn't going to matter, but if we were to analyse a lot of these individual phrases, the way that they sit on the melody, the things that they actually say, so often it feels like we're just trying to fill enough words to get to the end of a line, and it's just not a valuable use of words. There's also so many lyrics that have been changed from the Broadway version to this version, seemingly for the sake of it. It's like a Starlight Express in that way, where it's just an update that is neither better nor worse, it's just different. I'm like, okay, that lyric was this, it's now this. They're equally, like, not great. It just feels like the milkshake that this has always been has been stirred up, and so much of it is foam now, and we have a little less actual substance. That being said, there is still plenty that I enjoyed about it. Let me tell you about that. So I do enjoy Casey Nichola's direction and choreography. I feel like the tone of the whole thing being a little bit more light and being a little more insincere and silly has come largely from his perspective on it, but I also think it's a very slick and very cohesive production. There are a lot of moving parts, there are a lot of characters, we are in it and we are engaged the entire time. The whole thing never once dips. It is entertaining. Like I said, it's so funny, and the choreo is great. I particularly enjoy that at the end of Revenge Party, which now basically ends the first act, the dance break that used to be in Fearless, because I always loved that bit of choreography where they're doing like this thing with the arms and they're jumping around. I like that that is still in the show video, even if the song Fearless itself has been cut. Scott Pask's scenic design I actually think is brilliant. I know that sets involving lots of screens aren't universally well loved. I think it works very well here because they lean into them fully. It's not like having a very dark space and trying to create things with screens but trying to have pieces in front of it and trying to hide the fact you're using screens. They embrace this whole aesthetic of the show. It feels modern, it feels social media age, and it looks great, and they have really great graphics that they put on those screens. Occasionally they use them to articulate plot points, like they show images of Miss Norbury getting arrested, and I think it's weird to be seeing it before it's talked about and to see it in lieu of it being talked about. Oh, I have another note. I know this is meant to be the section about things that I like, but this really annoyed me. In Revenge Party, post-Halloween party, Katie is wearing like a cuter outfit because she's now deliberately trying to be among the plastics, because she's now trying to take Regina down. Except this is the moment where she's eating a Caltine bar and Regina's like, I'll take a whole box, and she doesn't know they're going to make her gain weight. All of the other plastics are wearing pink, and Katie is not wearing pink. And this is the moment where she's trying to fit in more with them, and she's not wearing pink, and she's eating lunch with them because she's having a Caltine bar. They break their own Pink on Wednesdays rule by having Katie not be in pink. Come on, everyone knows this. How can you have Katie not in pink when the rest of the three of them are wearing pink? Like, that's the Mean Girls law right there. Back to things that I liked, and let's talk about the costume design. This was by Katrina Lindsay. I thought it looked great. I wasn't actually anticipating there would be so many different costumes in the show, and we have fun Halloween costumes, and again, it's slightly updated on the most recent version that there's been for Broadway. Regina's outfits are updated. Her Worldburn outfit I really like now. It's a little bit Sandy from Grease-esque. The new outfit she wears in the Halloween sequence, she's not in a bunny costume. She is in this full, like, Diamante white bodysuit. It's a little bit Britney Spears in the Toxic video, but more white and less flesh tone. And she looks stunning and powerful, sure. I do think it doesn't necessarily look like something a teenager would wear. Like, it's not very rich teenage girl at an American house party. It's a little bit more representing Moldova for Eurovision. Still looks great. Still a beautiful costume. Kind of ages her a little bit more than we would like. And I know I mentioned a whole host of specific things that I have issues with. The reality is, if you have nostalgia for this, if you have a love for this film, chances are I think you're really going to enjoy it on stage, because it caters to the love for that. It caters to its fans, and these performances and these vocals and how brilliantly the whole thing has been produced are going to leave the audiences incredibly happy. It is so damn entertaining, it's really funny, it is charming. There are moments towards the end of the things that it like begins to pull on the heartstrings a little bit. I don't think it's going to make you feel an enormity of things, but I don't know who's looking for that in Mean Girls. I am meeting this show where it is, and in terms of the objectives that it's trying to deliver, it's doing a fantastic job. Its fans are going to love this. Could it be doing something on a more meaningful, deeper level? Potentially. But at the same time, Mean Girls is finally here in the West End, and for the most part, that's all anyone wants. So those have been my thoughts on the show. Like I said, if you've seen it already, comment down below, let me know what you thought, and I hope that you have enjoyed today's brand new video review. If you did, make sure you're subscribing here on YouTube, following me wherever you are listening to or seeing this review, so you don't miss any of my other upcoming West End and Broadway theatre reviews. Thank you so much. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!